Welcome to a Fighter's Chance podcast, where we give individuals in the combat sports world a voice to talk about the things worth fighting for. Today's guest is Maynard.
I appreciate you taking the time and talking to me. You have a great history in the UFC and a mixed martial artist. Doing a lot of my own research and just some of the training partners that you have had the opportunity to be with. And, I believe you wrestled with Rashad Evans at Michigan State. And I think Randy Couture and BJ Penn. So your experience on the training side should really be interesting for this conversation.
Okay.
I wanted to get your perspective on, you as a fighter, you have negotiated a fight, whether you've been in the UFC for 5 years or just starting out. You signed on that dotted line, that contract of who you're fighting. What are the next steps, like, to get you ready to that fight? What are the costs involved to get you from that dotted line to your hand raised or you lost?
Yeah. So obviously signing on that dotted line can be a lot of different scenarios even leading up to that. Maybe it's a short notice fight. Maybe it's a regular 10 weeks out. You have 10 weeks. The first 2 weeks is just kind of preparing everybody, talking to your coaches, getting a little game plan. 8 weeks, you start easing into it. You start getting, getting going. And then 6 weeks, you start picking up the intensity. 4 weeks, picking it up a little bit more focus on sparring. Then you start pulling back around 2 weeks out. You still go hard that last second week. And then on the last week, it's pretty much easy training, half hour to an hour, keeping the weight down, just kind of sharpening up any tools you already have. You're not adding any new tools. It's just what you've been training, going over that repetition.
When you start that camp, are you you in particular, do you know other fighters? Do you generally have a camp that you're already working with, and so that's who you go with? Or are you hiring, an outside expert to kind of get you to that finish line?
And so most people work with the team that they have. You might add an outside source a little bit, and that's what I was trying to do. On my way to the title, when I was 8-0, kind of 9-0, I worked with Extreme Couture. I had my coaches, but there was a point around 7-6 and 7-0 that my body was just completely, these camps were harder than anything I've ever been through. And everybody tells you that, like, oh, this is, you're supposed to feel pain. You're supposed to do the, and that's just old school mentality. And so I started bringing in, specialists, endurance specialists to check how kind of endurance athletes would lead up to a competition. I hired a NFL strength and conditioning coach that he was the head strength and conditioning coaches for the Denver Broncos when they won Super Bowl championships. And I happened to train with him a long time ago in college because he was working at Athletes Performance in Arizona, and I would go out there to work with him a little bit. But he ended up getting with Brock Lesnar for a couple camps, and he just helped Brock Lesnar to organize his camp. And when I hired him, there was a lot of resistance in my MMA camp, as far as, no, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't, but he wasn't telling anybody about boxing. He wasn't telling anybody about jiu-jitsu. He was just telling people, look, the human anatomy can do this, right? And once you start getting a little scientific on people and they can't rebuttal with stuff, they start shutting down and just like, no.
That's interesting because you mentioned the old school mentality about, it has to be this way. You got to feel the pain. You got to go through this. You got to pay your dues before you get to this. You hear
Right,
that
right,
whether it's fighting, business, you hear that all
right,
different things.
right,
And ultimately, I kind of feel like that comes from an area of resisting change.
right.
And
Because change is hard. Doing what you do is easy, and
right,
just counting on the same outcome. I mean, that is really comfortable, right?
right,
But once you start adding in change, that's figuring shit out, which is
right.
hard, man.
And with the human anatomy, that's awesome that you reached out to someone outside of just the fighting view, right?
Right,
If you want to build muscle, you should probably talk to someone who specializes in building muscle. If you want to
right,
endurance, get like a track
yeah,
runner or someone that's
yeah,
what they do.
yeah.
Do you think that the UFC mixed martial arts is moving more towards that, or has really dove
Yeah.
into that?
And so a lot of the stuff that I was doing in 2008, 2009, 2010, the UFCPI is now doing, and I mean, this is literally 10 years later that we're
Mhm.
starting to add in, pullback weeks. We're starting to add in, like, oh, okay, like examples like days off without feeling bad, right? Taking a
Right,
day off before you start feeling bad, because
right,
once you start feeling bad, that's almost a sign you have to take 2 or 3 days off, and
right,
just training at a high functioning level instead of the old school mentality. You got to be tired for this practice because that means you worked hard the practice before. And
right,
so that's where I was at, because I really had opportunity. I went to St. Edward's in Ohio, which
okay,
is the number one wrestling school in the nation, and it's not the number one wrestling school in the nation for years and years and years because of just hard work, but because if anybody knows about wrestling, Iowa,
oh
Dan
yeah,
Gable. Dan Gable's like one of the masterminds of training and changing the sport. I happen to have a athlete that he trained through Iowa, trained me at St. Ed's, John Heffernan. And, it really, and I moved out there alone. So he kind of took me under his wing a lot, and we would go sweat in the steam rooms and just talk. And I would pick his brain about Iowa, Dan Gable, and, just really fascinated about that part of it. And then in college, I had Luke Richardson, who, kind of changed my ideas. He was at Athletes Performance in Arizona, and I would fly out and we'd keep in touch by email because he was training, NFL combine prospects. He was training baseball players, golfers. And the one thing that kind of stood out, a couple things that kind of stood out to me was if you hear a business say, look, we're trying to do the least possible we can to get the most we can, right?
right,
You'd probably say, oh, that's smart, right? But you hear a pro athlete say that, look, I'm trying to do the least possible I can to get the most possible I can,
yeah. You want to be
right?
as
To get,
efficient as possible.
yes, because now no wear and tear on your body, no wear and tear mentally, no wear and tear, your brain. I mean, there's a lot of, but we get in that old school, especially with MMA. Boxing was it's not a sport where there's a lot of college educated. They don't hire
Right,
on to work for a team. Like, hey, you have to have a resume. It's a guy starting up a boxing gym, and usually what happens is with that type of sport is, he gets a good guy that's good, and they just mesh, right? And
right,
whatever happens just meshes and that guy gets good. Now the trainer is like, oh my God, what do you do? We need to do that. We need to do that.
Right.
Everybody needs to do this. And you think about diets, no one diet is good for everybody.
Right.
And that's why combat sports is so, and that's why Dan Gable was so unbelievable, because he could take literally anybody and make them really, really good. The other thing that Luke told me was, a lot of people come to me and, say, man, you got the number one draft pick. Like, you get all these number one draft pick guys. Like, of course you're going to do
Right.
good. He said, that's true, but it is easier to screw up a good guy than to make him better, because making him better is only this much, right? So if you take GSP and you put him in a completely different camp and he just doesn't do what he used to do, there's probably a good chance they're going to mess him up, right?
Sure.
Who's going to make him better, right? You take him out of his whole realm of what he does for training and put him in a place to where it's like, all right, we're going to change up everything. We're going to do a major overhaul. And this is what I think. A lot of times he's going to get screwed up, but
it's interesting you bring up GSP, because when we're talking about the, the old way of new things, the new way that we're starting to go into, I don't know if you had the opportunity to listen to Joe Rogan's podcast with his GSP's trainer. I forget his name.
Yeah, Faraz,
talking about like not going full max. And I wonder if that is a common thing across the board, or do most fighters and camps kind of contradict that?
So, GSP has a very, very fortunate, he's always had this aspect of GSP has always been a new market. Well, he was a new market coming in, Canada, right?
Yeah, right.
And he's done a great job of what he's doing, and a lot of it is because he's good. He's an athlete, and he wants to get better. But a lot of it is he's gotten paid a lot more than other guys.
True.
So now a guy like Faraz sees the potential he has. He can literally concentrate on just GSP.
Right.
It's like Freddie Roach. When Pacquiao's in camp, he goes wherever Pacquiao's going,
right.
Or when he did, he could focus on Pacquiao, right? The problem with MMA is there's a lot of team aspect now, and with the team aspect, as a head coach, it takes a lot of work to individualize everything as well, right? You have to run the team, but now you have to individualize a lot of different things. So in college wrestling, what happened with Dan Gable is he has a salary, right? He has a salary and he works, and that's his focus. And so with MMA, it starts getting to be like, well, I got to run the gym and I got to run practice.
Right.
What's the easiest? What's more bang for my buck as a head coach or a gym owner?
Yeah, it sounds like they're more or less like contracting their own effort and their own time to a lot of different things.
Yeah, and they got to make the most of it, right? So a lot of times you go into a gym and it's like, all right, guys, sparring day, and everybody spreads out, and they spar, and there's 20 different groups sparring, and GSP has probably his own gym time when he's in camp, and which is great, but he can pay for that, and that's.
I was going to say he probably has to he has to shell out some big money for that, where a lot of these fighters just don't have that ability.
And if you look at a percentage wise, like on a head coach, even 3%, 5%, whatever it is
of your purse.
Okay. Of your purse, 5% of like 40 grand or even 80 grand or 100 grand, yeah, $5,000 is a lot of money, but now you're talking about 3 million, GSP-ish, or even like $1 million.
Right.
Yeah, 5% starts getting to be up there.
And that's just one guy.
And that's just one guy, but that's what people are looking for, is that one guy that is gonna, Greg Jackson's, done a great job to where he has a lot of different guys,
Okay.
and he's worked it. Greg Jackson's doing really good. I think Henry Hoof is doing really good. Henry Hoof's lined up with, kind of a medical company, a hospital out in South Dakota to go out there to help sponsor the gym and to really give him the ability to concentrate on just coaching.
So when you're in those team environments, you look for those coaches that can do, that are going to help you spring forward, right?
Right.
That 5%, that's got to be a pretty big pill to swallow, though. I mean, like if you have that, that $40,000-$50,000 that you're signing for, that's a chunk coming out of it. And then are they providing you with a nutritionist or these other specialized guys, or is that on you to find those?
Yeah, so everything's on us. And when you talk about 5%, you should be paying your coach a little bit more than that. I'm thinking like 10%.
Okay.
Just because they're in there every day. Managers take between 10 to 20%, and that's just to renegotiate a contract and if they can, negotiate an opponent, the best opponent, which happens at times, but doesn't happen, most of the time. It's just basically who the UFC wants. So if you're talking about 10% there, 10% for training, and then you're talking about, if you hire nutritionists and, that's usually a flat fee, that might be anywhere from $500 to, if they come in and start cooking and doing all that stuff. Then you're talking about camp costs, right? Just being in camp, the extra driving to the gyms, all this stuff just adds up. A lot of people just eat healthier in camp. That's my expense all the time. But, just the supplements you got to take.
Right.
There's a lot of people that have a lot of extra costs involved with training camp expenses. And so, that's just one of the downfalls of the sport, is everything's coming out of your pocket. And the minute, and the great part about being young is you don't care. You just want that win. You just want that goal.
Right.
The bad part about being a vet is like, shit, man, I'm going to skimp here. I'm going to skimp here. I'm like, I got kids.
Right. Yeah. I agree.
We're not talking like millions and millions of dollars. We're talking like, geez, 10,000 is a lot when you take it out of 100,000.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you, fighter pay is definitely in the news right now. That's, you have some of the bigger names right now in the UFC kind of fighting with Dana White and over contract negotiations.
Yeah.
That's kind of torn, but there's some camps that think if you sign a contract, you sign the dotted line, you should honor that. But I mean, this is the sports world. Negotiations change all the time.
What camps are those though?
No, and not camps. I mean, let me retract that. There's some mindset that thinks like, whether it's a fighting contract, a mortgage, like you sign the contract, you can't go back to the bank and
no, I totally understand that. And trust me, that's where I was at the last 4 or 5 years was I was trying to honor my contract, an 8-fight contract. So just because we're trying to honor a contract doesn't mean, that we don't need to try to get some rules to help us
100%.
Yeah, change it up. And like George Masvidal, you talk to George Masvidal, and it's, I'm not taking a pay reduction in my fight. I'm not doing this. I want my contract changed up. And then you talk to a guy still 2-3 years in the UFC. No, I'm going to honor my contract. I'm going to get this done. And I'm going to prove my worth. And it's like, but that's two different people. George Masvidal's proved his worth for shit. He's been fighting longer than I have. I remember watching him in smaller shows. This dude has proved his worth over and over and over again. And that's the problem that I came into, is it never paid off, right? All the contracts never paid off. The best fights, one of the greatest fights ever, never paid off. It never paid off. I was spending more on my training camp, than I was guaranteed. And in my mind, it was like, no, just keep going, man. It's going to pay off, can't put a price tag on a win. So I understand where those kids are at. And even managers, there's a couple managers who are like, no, you signed the contract. Well, yeah, they need you to fight because that's money in their pocket. So, yeah, it is different. And, and you have to look at it as, it's not just a person's opinion. It's really where they're at in their career.
Right.
Like, you talk to that same guy who's like, I'm going to honor my contract and put him 10 years down the road. He's going to be like, no, fuck this. Like, this is stupid. I can't believe I'm still getting paid this much.
So, I completely agree.
And that's what UFC wants. They want to have a revolving door. Hurry up and get these guys out of there before they start wanting more.
So let me say this to you. When we look at all the major sports, right? Football, basketball, let's use those as an example, right? You have a football player, a basketball player, they make it to the league, right? There is that union, that players union, that allows them to get a minimum. And that minimum's a lot higher than what we'd be comparing to a first-year fighter, without a doubt, right?
Understandable.
Where I think the fighters are starting to speak up and they're starting to push that. But I want to comment on what you said about the cycle. And I think it's inherent in mixed martial arts is that you come out, and when you're first starting out, you don't have a lot of the luxuries of getting maybe that best camp or paying for all that stuff. You just don't have that allotted amount of money. And so you are willing to beg, borrow, and steal and scratch to get on that, to get to that level, to get to that UFC, to get that card. And then you get there and you start making a name for yourself, right? And you're saying, 10 years down the road, you're like, well, what the hell? I got this 8-year contract. I've been making millions for you guys. I'm knocking people out, fight of the year. But then there's that guy from 10 years now coming in, brand new, that's willing to take whatever he can get. Yeah. So I think until you get those veteran fighters, those ones with that have made it, and they're like, what? I've capped. I need to make a stand for overall. I think it's just going to be a vicious circle.
Right. And so what's happening now is our sport's getting a little bit older. So even the young kids are starting to see guys being broke, guys having mental health issues, guys, just body issues, broken. They're starting to see that. Because I remember in 2008 when Randy Couture was going up against the UFC, and he hired lawyers, and how law works and court works is whoever has the most money, it seems like, can drag it out the longest. And he was going up against the UFC, and he almost went broke, doing that, because they have a bunch of different lawyers. And that was what he was trying to preach is, this isn't fair. There's literally no laws protecting us contractually and financially, not even minimum wage, right? That everybody has. There's a standard for minimum wage. Well, look what we have. You know, we don't even have a minimum wage. There's
Right.
people that could be in the UFC, go to a fight, $12,000, $10,000, pay for all the expenses, basically come out with $5,000, get hurt in that fight, and then can't work for another year. That's not even minimum wage. That's not
Right.
even, I mean,
Right.
you know, and, you know, there's just, I'm pretty sure that they added like, you know, and that you just have to have an extra job when you're coming up. You
Right.
know, I didn't, you know, but I also believed in what I was doing and hustled different, you know, stuff. And I had a good job before where I kind of stacked up a little bit of money and you know, it's just, that's what Randy was trying to do. But back then, you know, it was just, everybody was just trying to get what they could get. That's still like that now, but I think people are starting to see the outcome a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
They're starting to understand, like, whoa, you know, they're watching these guys come through that had been with them for 8 to 10 years, completely broke, you know, have no skills, no job, you know, and on top of that, their body and mind are completely gone.
Yeah, that's yeah, I
And
mean
and so that's what's happening is right now we would love to get a union going, but that's I think that's down the road, right? But we need to get the Ali Act passed, and that's you know, taking it to Congress, because they cover boxing, right? They cover combat sports, but MMA isn't covered as a combat sport. Yeah, and
that
so
doesn't seem right.
yeah, but that was back when MMA was still new.
Right.
So it didn't get covered as a combat sport. So what I am told is that made it more appealing for people to buy it. You know, when Dana and Lorenzo and the Fertittas bought it, it wasn't covered under the Ali Act. That means they don't have to conform to one fight deals. They can put people in longer contracts, and once you have a person in contract, it's not like they can get out of contract. They can't even, you can't retire and be out of contract.
Right.
You're still in contract.
Yeah, they have
So
you until you are either going to fulfill that or you're done.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that was, you know, and there's also no transparency on the Ali Act covers transparency. So the way that the UFC got around the one rule that we do have, you have to report the pay of each individual's athlete to the commission, right?
Right.
We get to see the pay. Well, they started doing backroom bonuses, which kept people happy, and then nobody really knew what everybody was getting paid unless they would call them on the phone or something. And even then, it's like, you know, I feel like I'm a UFC guy and they like me and they gave me this. I'm just going to keep it quiet because, man, this is a hard sport. It's easy to be kind of selfish and to think about what I can get out of this, right? And not what we have to do.
Right. And I think, and that was to my point of, until you start having some of the, because obviously the guys at the bottom, they're not going to make the change. They have no notoriety. No. They don't have no star. But when you start getting the, it amazes me, John Jones, John Jones, right? He's had his incidences outside of fighting. If he was in any other sport, I don't know if he still would be at the same level as he is, but he's dominated and been a pretty big draw for the UFC for a long time. But
why wouldn't he be at this?
No. I mean, like
the same level.
No, and not the same level as like a champion. I mean, like the amount of chances that he has been given from the UFC. He's come into trouble. I don't know if that would have been the case, but
Yeah.
But
Well,
you have
well,
him.
also,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah. Well, also, John Jones is a crucial part of them making money,
Oh, of
right?
course.
So is, an athlete in NFL a crucial part of them making money, right? One athlete that's kind of messing it up. No, it's they don't depend on anybody. And that's what the UFC is trying to do, to where they don't have to depend on anybody, and
Right.
they can get rid of guys like that, but it's a fighting sport. People like, guys like John Jones.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
anyways, yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's good. So I like where this is heading because, if we're talking about leverage and UFC having, let's say once you sign the contract, you have almost no leverage whatsoever, right? It's
None.
if you're
Yeah.
if you're big enough, you can make a lot of noise and it can look bad at least for a little bit to the UFC,
Yeah.
and then maybe have some side conversations, pay
Yeah.
him a little bit more, and then he stops talking.
Yeah.
Right? But I wrote an article about Mazeldov, and what my premise of it was that I thought he missed his opportunity for this title fight at UFC 251, and
Right.
and what my premise is that, like, he's in contract negotiations, he wants to be paid
Right.
more money. I believe they came back and offered him the same amount of money as the Nate Diaz fight, and
Right.
he still wants more. And
Right.
my premise is that I think there was a big missed opportunity for himself and for other fighters, because if he would have
Right.
won the title, you would have had now, well, if you count Henry Cejudo, who just retired, that wants more money. John Jones wants more
Right.
money. Mazeldov
Right.
wants more. That's 3 champions right now,
Right. Yeah.
blocking divisions.
Yeah.
And
yeah. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that was, if you get to that level and you get these fighters at that level stopping and saying, no, we're not going to do that, I think that will then give the rest of the fighters that opportunity.
So, and this is nothing against you, but now you're being the armchair quarterback. That's like,
sure.
Yeah, that's like, oh man, if he would have just done this and this and taken this extra step, and there's no right time to do anything, right? Look at Muhammad Ali. He sat out, 2 of his most prime years because he didn't want to go to the war. He spoke up for everything. He spoke up for races. He spoke up for countries. He did what he had to do, and that's why he's an icon. He's not a legend. He's an icon. He's one of the most prolific, sports athletes ever, right? I mean, there's nobody better than him, and there's nobody bigger than him. He's just one of those guys that he stood up to people, and I think that's what they're doing, and I commend them. There's never going to be a perfect time, and that's what the UFC banks on is get to that next fight, and then this is the time, or get to this, and then I'm going to renegotiate. Get to this, and that's what I thought when I fought the 8-fight deal was, look, I'm just going to rep this out, get it out of the way, and prove to them that, I'm worth more money or whatever. And it never happens because it's like the casinos. The house always wins, especially when it's stacked in their favors, right? The house always wins. You drive through that strip and it's beautiful. That's not built on winners. That's built on losers. And that's a lot of losers, and that's what they understand. They've built a system to where you're always going to lose, in the long run, because you don't have that long. And so, I commend George and John, for taking a stand right then and there,
Absolutely.
because there's always a better time if you do this, if you take this next step, and that's what they're banking on, right? Is dangle that little carrot, take that carrot, and then there's going to be a bigger carrot, a little bit bigger, bit bigger, and we're just going to get him by, and you feel like you're just getting by to the next one. And at the end of the day, you're going to be done, and the UFC is going to be doing that to somebody else.
Right.
And they're just going to keep that going. So,
well, yeah, I mean, you're right. There's no perfect time. And I just thought that if he were to be able to get the title, then it just gives you guys that more leverage. But
all they do is, if you hold out on the title, they just get an interim,
right?
Or they just do another title, or they strip you of the title, and that's what they've created, right? There's no real legitimacy in the sports aspect of it, right? We're having guys fight for titles that are just popular. It's not that they moved up the rank and they beat all the right guys, and there's these rankings where, if you work up through the ranks, then you're going to get the title shot. I mean, they made up a title for Nate and George. They just made up a title, BMF. Like, all right. And the only reason George got that was because he was just popular at the time. It was just, and he did that. He made himself popular, and they exploited that. And I think he thinks that is like, dude, I'm tired of this. Right. I'm tired of being exploited. I'm tired of just being the guy to make them money and to use to just get through one more pay-per-view, and then, who's next?
So I think the UFC is kind of they've been teetering with this for quite some time, and they're going down a slippery slope when it comes to titles. And for a fight fan like myself to watch it, I think they've slowly started devaluing a title, like a championship. A title holder it hasn't meaned as much as it has 10 years ago, right? Like, you work your ass off to get where you are, to be that champion, dominate the division, where you've had the John Jones, the Aldo, Anderson Silva, where they've run through division.
Yeah.
But
here's another thing. Oh, we got a double champ. So the double champ, the champ below the weight class, gets to just skip everybody and catch him real quick with just a punch or something. Oh, now I'm a double champ. That means I am the best at 2 weight classes, which is complete bullshit, right? The hardest thing about getting a belt is getting through the people to get the belt. Right? That is the grind, right? Even the top 3 or 4. Like, that is the 2-3 fights you don't match up stylish. You don't match up style-wise, and you don't get to the belt or whatever it is. It's just like, I never understood that double champ. It's not like they had their belt and started to work their way up at heavyweight or whatever it is, and then they fight for the belt. You know, what's the craziest thing we can do? Oh, well, let's just have him jump to a title fight.
I mean, the one that comes to mind the most is obviously Conor McGregor, right? He's done he, like him or hate him, he's probably one of the best promoting artists. Like him, Ali, Tyson, and he's one of the greatest of all time for promoting a fight, and he in the ring, outstanding fighter. But as far as a champion goes, I could make the argument, and I have, that he's one of the worst UFC champions of all time, because he's never defended a title. He has won a belt, had it go away. Won a belt, had it go away. 2-time champion, great. Never defended it. And I think that's where the UFC is they've marketed that and saying, like, oh, look at Conor, he's won both belts, he's the 2-time champion, he's making all this money.
And who controls who he goes up against? It's the UFC. There's no outside factors to where he has to climb through the ranks. The guy's fought 2 wrestlers. Chad Mendez, who literally took the fight on 2 weeks' notice. Now, if anybody knows anything about a wrestling camp or a wrestling title fight, that's hard.
Right.
That is a hard training camp. When you have that game plan of, look, I got to wrestle this guy for 5 rounds, 25 minutes. In wrestling, it goes a period of 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes in college. And you're exhausted after that. Let alone a 25-minute fight where you're trying to wrestle. Now, Aldo, he got hurt. They called up Chad Mendez. The guy, I guess he was hunting in New Zealand at the time. He said he'd take his fight. He said he'd take the fight. Flew back out. Maybe got a week of training in, right? Nothing. And that's what happened. He completely gassed. He was destroying Conor in round 1, taking him down. You just can't keep up that pace if you're not trained to do that. And then he fought Khabib, who's, arguably one of the best ever. And Khabib, he made him look kind of stupid.
Yeah,
And then he gave up with Nate, And I mean, if you put the pressure on him and you don't respect him, and you wrestle him, he has no idea like how to deal with that. And the UFC, they knew what they needed to do with him, and that's get him to titles as quick as possible and as good looking as possible.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously announced he's retired. I don't think that is going to, I just, personal opinion, I don't think he's going to stay retired. I think once there's an opportunity to fight either Khabib again or Gaethje, but it will be interesting to see how that all shakes out. I mean, honestly, he's one of my favorite fighters to watch in the ring. He's super entertaining,
unbelievable
fighter.
And then don't get me wrong, he's beat people like Aldo, like unbelievable,
who's dominated for a year.
Yeah.
And then
boom. But then you play that, and that's the problem. That's MMA. Like, you catch a person, and that was his technique. That was great. But you play that fight just to see who's the best fighter. You play that 10 times, they might be half and half, right? I don't know, because that's never going to happen, right? That's just talking. But like,
yeah. I was skeptical when it first happened. Like, he just caught him, one punch, done. Like, we just missed out on an awesome war that would have happened. Yeah. And then a video resurfaced of him training. Either it was before the fight and doing literally the same move, like knowing it's going to happen and just dropping them like that was.
And so that's just that was just a broad move, kind of what you do as a southpaw, in order to, that's just a broad move. Of course he's training that. A person rushes in, you step out of the way, you throw your left. I mean, and again, he did that. He did a great job on it. But what I'm trying to say is you play that in college wrestling, and I'm not trying to compare college wrestling, but you'll wrestle a guy 5 to 10 times in a year, like at times, at least 5 times, and then you start understanding who really is the best, and because combat sports. And again, combat sports isn't football, right? It's not hockey. That's contact sport, right? Mm-hmm. Combat sports is an individual going in and combat. That's wrestling. That's MMA. That's jiu-jitsu. Just wrestling. I forgot where I was on that one, but it would just be curious to see, the best of 3, because anything can happen in those, right? Hey, a championship could be a best of 3 fights. That now you're knowing who really, is good. Well, and I think Conor did a great job. He did a phenomenal job with Aldo, but again, you play that 10 different times and it could come out, with Conor winning 10 times. It could come out with Jose Aldo winning 9. And, you know, you just never know.
Right.
And that's the great part about MMA.
It's definitely an exciting sport, you know, and you don't have that luxury of a 5-game series or a 5-fight series.
Yeah,
You just,
right.
it's winner take all. It could be your day. It couldn't be your
Which
day.
makes it fun, right? Which makes it fun. But logistically, like, you think about that, like, as a athlete, as a coach, you know, you think about, okay, you know, I wonder who would win that, like, again, if it was a full fight. And like, as an athlete, you know, like I remember people were talking about, you know, kind of Nagano is, you know, this hard hitter. Everybody's like, oh my God. As a fan, it's scary. It's like, holy cow, that guy is so scary. Just like Mike Tyson was, right? Mike Tyson was scary. But then you take him to those deep waters, you get him past that round 1 knockout. I mean, if you look at Nagano's record, he's only gone past like round 1 or 2. He's only had two decisions.
Isn't that usually those type of fighters though? I mean, it's either they're going to knock you out. He only has
2 decisions, and he lost both of them. You know, I don't know what his camp was like, whatever. There could be, but as an athlete, so what the point I'm trying to get at is, people are like as an athlete, Daniel Cormier called him out. John Jones called him out. And they're like, no, they're crazy. They're nuts. No, they're not. All you have to do when you look at that record, you're like, oh, I just got to get this guy to deep waters. I just have to make sure that I don't get knocked out, you know, in round 1 or you know, I don't let him touch me in round 1. And that's when the game plan comes in. So athletes and coaches, they think a different way than a lot of the fans, right? All the fans were like, this guy is scary. Nobody should want to go up against him. John Jones is just holding out because of money. And it's like, no, John Jones is just holding out, you know, what he says is the money, but really he's scared to go up against Nagano. No, Nagano has his name right now. I want more money, and I'm going to hold out because it's not really worth it to go up in weight, to give you guys. And that's what people try to, you know, to paint the picture in the UFC is like, oh, he doesn't want to fight, you know, because they know as an athlete, like, we fight. We don't want to hear that. It's kind of like, oh shit, no, I'm going to go prove myself. And then and then the next fight, no, he doesn't want to fight. And that's why you see Dana, oh, if he's retired, he's retired. He doesn't want to fight anymore. That's mind games, you know, and he knows that. He's been dealing with, you know, taking advantage of fighters for a long time. So he knows how to work them. But there's just a whole different mentality between athletes and the fans, between coaches and the fans. You know, it's hard to judge a person off a 1-round fight. You know, the scariest people are those guys that can grind it for 5 rounds. You know. John Fitch's, Tony Ferguson's, you know, just these people that can have a war that you know is going to be there every second of every round. The Nate Diaz's, they're going to eat everything that you give them. They're going to have cardio for days, you know, and if it did go past that, they'd still be ready and they'd still be there. Those are the guys that are like, ooh, man.
Scary.
Yeah. Well, not scary. You just know that this is going to be a fucking war.
Right.
This is going to be a war, you know?
Right.
Like, at least if you get knocked out in round 1, it's just like, all right, well, got done with that. I got knocked out, but wasn't that tough.
How do you handle that mentally if let's say you have a full camp to fight somebody, right? And we see these fights all the time where it's like a first round knockout in less than a minute, and it looks like the guy didn't even fight, right?
Yeah.
Not the guy on the ground knocked out looks like he fought,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
how do you, when you get knocked out like that, I don't know if you, over the course of your career, if that really, happened too many times, but training all that effort, getting all that training in, and then for it to end just like that, how do you deal with that?
So, and that's where my career kind of changed is when I stopped putting in a ton of money to go train with people, and I started to looking for different avenues of income, and that was kind of my last half of the career. I mean, I always tell athletes, preparation builds confidence, and if you are walking to the cage and you're prepared, you're confident. There shouldn't be a lot of nerves. You know what to expect. You've done the process to know what to expect in the octagon. If you skimped on a lot of that stuff and you have your mind elsewhere, that's when the nerves usually play in, and that's when you don't know what the outcome of yourself is going to be, right? It's hard to control the outcome of the total fight, but you can control yourself, your own outcome. Okay. And so that's when the nerves come in, and a lot of times that's when those round one knock TKOs happen. Was when I went in and I just wasn't, I was doubting myself. I didn't put all I had into it, to get in there. And it's not that I didn't want to or I didn't try. It was just when you have your mind on a ton of other stuff, like remodeling a house to flip it, and I can't go to workouts today, and whatever, I mean, it's just, that's what happens. So, like for me, it was always, man, I just have to change it up next camp, and whatever it is. So, it's just, you just have to look back at what you did, what your camp was, and make changes there. Mm-hmm. Well, if you win off a quick knockout, you just, you still need to look back at your camp and check where you can add it, a little bit more. And I know guys that took a kind of had a short camp or whatever, just jumped in, and they get the knockout, they come out of the cage, and it's like, man, I'm so glad that didn't go past that, because I'm not in shape. So they're happy, and it's just one of those sports, and that's kind of why it taints the sport that we work off, showing a win base, a lot of times, is because people are going in there and they're making mistakes based off of, like, you ever heard that term, desperation is a stinky cologne? Right? It's just not good. And a lot of people are going in there making these bad choices, whether it's bad choices in training camp, training too hard, just to get their extra paycheck, just to get that win, possibly get that win, or not matching up right with the good opponent, or just a lot of choices are made because they're trying to get that extra paycheck, even in the cage. Oh, I'm gonna go balls out, and I'm gonna try to get this win bonus and a knockout bonus, and then you get caught. Mm-hmm. Now you're behind the 8 ball even more, with bills, with everything, because you took that chance, and it's gambling, and Dana's a big gambler, and but I don't really don't feel like an MMA, like a fight should be a gamble. You should know. And it works out best for them because they get the nice fight. They get whatever fight it is, and they have rights to it. They have everything to it. They get that fight, and now you get half the money. You know?
Right.
It's like my Edgar fights. They have it. Like, I can't do anything with that.
Right.
You know? And one of those, I got half my money.
Okay. So you've been out of the ring or the octagon for a couple years now. I don't think have you officially retired?
No,
No,
I'm not going to retire.
Not
going to retire because I don't want to end with the UFC. Like,
okay.
Yeah, they've been my whole career, which is unfortunate, but I don't want to retire under them.
Okay.
And I'm not under them, like I'm not in contract still, because Dana, he asked me to retire because he wants me to be under contract or whatever, and he would probably tell you that that's not it. But he asked me to retire, and I said no, but you can give me a release, and he gave me a release.
Okay. So so you weren't under any fight contracts, but could they if you wanted to go to like Bellator or something, could you do that?
Yeah. So I got my release. A lot of times he won't give you a release, right? But I still had like 4 fights left on my contract.
Okay.
And he would have had to give me those, if he kept me.
Gotcha.
So he likes to talk people into retiring under contract, and that means if anything big happens and your name explodes, then you have to go back to the UFC.
Well, I've always enjoyed your fights. So if you ever get another chance in another organization, I will definitely tune in because
appreciate that.
Very entertaining.
Yeah. No, it'll I just want to, I don't know how many I definitely have one more right in my mind, or and then you get to that next one and you might have 2 more, you might have 3 more. I know my days are definitely numbered as far as being an athlete. I don't feel like it. I've always been that guy that tried to change up my training, tried to take care of my health, tried to do all that stuff. And, so we were going through a little bit of personal stuff. Like my wife was in masters and
nice
new baby. And we just didn't want to jump back into it right away, like as the term, desperation's a stinky cologne,
Right.
Don't be desperate and just jump back into it because we have all this stuff going on. And, we've always done well, as far as, I've never had to fight, it's just kind of been like, well, that's a little bit of money we can use, and so, that's kind of where we're at. And I was talking to a couple promotions and COVID hit, and it's just, again, kind of take my time.
Well, shout out to Bellator or someone. Let's get Gray Maynard to fight here.
Yeah.
Anything else? I want to make sure I get, if you're working on any special projects or anything like that, I want to make sure I give you some time to shout out to that.
Yeah. Well, no real special projects yet. My wife went to her school for a master's in functional health and nutrition, kind of like holistic doctor-ish, but it's more how to help people through a lot of nutrition, a lot of lifestyle changes, a lot of how to cure chronic illness. And so that kind of brought us to a point to where we're going to start to get out information on training.
Nice.
I've been able to work with some unbelievable people
Yep.
all over the world. And, I really want to help change this sport up, through training, through health. We're going to really focus on brain health, preventative brain health, right? Obviously training is a big part of that, but also what to eat to help,
Right.
to help get the brain nutrition and help to get the brain protection and recovery. And so we're in the process of doing all that stuff now, and it'll just be it'll be good. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I look forward to hearing what you put out.
Yeah, you get the athlete and you get the doctor.
Yeah.
So, we work together.